36. Overim led them down a tunnel that hadn't seen use in years. Dust and cobwebs clung to every surface. The tunnel twisted and twined and turned back on itself. Several times they had to squeeze through thin cracks, but Overim pushed them on. Once they had to jump across a crevasse, and the floor dipped at an odd angle. While they walked, Gryph checked his prompts. You have received 15,637 XP for slaying Wormen times 10. You have received 11,666 XP for slaying Hellhound. Impressive, Gryph thought. Did you know that the Barrow was once on the surface? Overim stated, in a tone that made Gryph think of the bored tour guide from the time when the Colonel took him and Bryn to see the Washington Monument. It was a tower that stood taller than the tallest trees. Then some cataclysm occurred, and the earth swallowed the tower. Eventually, a hill of grass grew over the entrance. Locals told tales of ghouls and revenants, saying the Barrow was haunted. Looks like the locals were right, Wick said. Gryph could tell the gnome was attempting to jest away his fear over Tifila. They rounded a corner, and Overim stopped. Do either of you have any affinity for thought magic? I don't, Wick said. I have 100% affinity in every sphere, Gryph said in a low voice. Wick and Overim stared at him in shock. The Godhead. You may want to keep that information on a need-to-know basis, Overim said intently. People fear power, and you could someday grow to be very powerful. Gryph's mind immediately went to Alaron, and he knew the adjudicator spoke true. Overim stepped up to Gryph. I will teach you something. He held up his hands. May I? Gryph hesitated before nodding. Overim placed his hands on Gryph's head, feeling the power of the man's grip. Close your eyes and try to ease your thoughts. Gryph closed his eyes and breathed in deeply several times, inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the mouth. Then he felt, or perhaps heard, a low hum as unseen energy built around Overim's hands. The humming increased, and then waves of warmth pumped from Overim into Gryph. Tendrils of thought whirled their way through the fog that clouded Gryph's mind, and then suddenly he knew. You have learned the spell Mind Shield, Sphere, Thought Magic, Tier, Base. Allows the caster to shield his mind or the mind of another with the proper leveling. Mana cost, 50. Casting time, 2 seconds. Effectiveness. For purposes of resisting mental attacks, Mind Shield temporarily allows the user's wisdom to mimic their highest attribute. Duration, 10 minutes per level. Each tier of mastery allows the caster to shield another mind. At Grandmaster level, all allies of the caster are shielded. Cooldown, 10 minutes. You have learned the skill Thought Magic. Level 1. Tier, Base. Skill type, Active. You can now wield the power of Thought Magic. Thought Magic allows the user to tap into the power of the sentient mind. Advanced users can tap into the source itself, the organizing intelligence behind the formation of the realms and perhaps the only true God. Thought magic makes use of spells that enables one to see others' thoughts, manipulate the minds of others, and affect the world with their thoughts. Users of thought magic are rare, and most do not advertise their abilities. For obvious reasons, they are mistrusted. Gryph's eyes popped open, and he nodded wryly to himself at the last comment of the prompt. Having just had his mind nearly shredded by thought magic, he understood the mistrust all too well. He would endeavor to learn all he could about this magic. If nothing else, it would help protect him from creatures like the Arboleth. They rounded another corner, and a break in the masonry of the wall revealed a deep shaft. Gryph stuck his head through the broken wall and looked down. An immediate sense of vertigo gripped at him, and his knees buckled. The shaft disappeared deep into the ground, much further than Gryph's night vision could pierce. The shaft was uneven and had the bulbous texture that reminded Gryph of cooled magma. Had this shaft melted? Is this where the earth swallowed the tower? "You want us to go down there," Wick said with trepidation. "It's how I got up here," Ovrim responded, as if that helped. He ignored Gryph and Wick's exchanged glances and tugged on a metal piton set into the masonry. "You hammered these in," Gryph said. He could see the faint metal glint of several more descending into the darkness. "Yes." "There has to be another way," Wick complained again, his face blanching as he looked down the shaft of endless black. "There is. Through the Worman camp, then through the Underlake, where Gryph had so much fun, and then through the Warrens, and then through the Grove. At least Gryph killed the Arboleth for us." "Well, that doesn't sound so bad," Wick said. "The Grove sounds lovely." "It's the home of the Dark Dryad and her army of wolf spiders." "Oh, well, maybe the Death Shaft is all right then," Wick said, and once again stared down into the unknown depths. Gryph knew Wick was covering his fear with sarcasm, and knew that fear wasn't only about the chasm below them, or the Worman, or even a troop of wolf spiders, but a deep fear for his missing love. Gryph grabbed his shoulder and squeezed. "We'll find her," he said. "How can you be so sure?" Wick said, his mask falling away and his eyes pleading. "Because the Barrow King doesn't want Tifila," Gryph said. "He wants me." Gryph cast Animate Rope and ordered his rope to secure itself to the piton. Ovrim nodded as Gryph spun around and dropped. For a sickening moment, gravity tugged him down into the unknown. But then the rope held, and Gryph's feet came to the wall. "Just like old times," Gryph said. "You and I have very different old times, buddy," Wick said. Gryph gave one last glance up and thought he saw a look in Wick's eyes. A look that said, "I'll give you to him if it saves her life." Gryph reached the next piton and secured his rope to it before moving on. Ovrim picked his spots well, suggesting he had some caving experience. As Gryph descended, ancient fears built inside him. A deep, dark shaft was a scary place on Earth. In the realms, it was downright terrifying. "Is there anything in here we should be afraid of?" Gryph said in a whisper, when the group had gathered on a large outcropping to rest. "A dose of healthy fear helps one survive." "Yeah, that is the worst way you could have answered that question," Wick said in a low voice, his eyes moving to and fro. "Just stick to the path, and we should be fine. But it is best if I lead." "Should be," Wick said. "I'm pretty sure I hate you." Ovrim said nothing, as Gryph helped him over the edge, but Gryph could see a buildup of apprehension as the man eased himself down. Despite the thundering of his heartbeat, they traversed 3 more rope lengths before the terrain changed. This latest stop was on a small rock bridge that traversed from one side to the other, as if it were some kind of support beam. As Gryph's feet hit the bridge, Ovrim brought a finger to his lips, requesting silence. Gryph's eyes scanned the area, but the darkness was too great, and even his night vision couldn't make out any details. Gryph helped Wick down and motioned for his silence as well. The gnome didn't exactly have a track record for being quiet. Wick nodded and likewise cast an apprehensive look. Ovrim hung over the side of the bridge and pointed his hand straight down. Silent chanting resulted in a pulse of purple energy firing from his hand. It traveled about 100 yards, where it hung in the air, illuminating the area. Gryph noticed how much slimmer the shaft became, and a dread feeling of claustrophobia built up inside him. Then he saw that the walls were moving. Gryph snapped his gaze up to Ovrim, whose grim look did not ease Gryph's fears. Wick clapped a hand over his own mouth to prevent his natural outburst. A moment later, he pulled his hand away and mouthed, "What the hell?" to the other men. Ovrim eased himself down and clipped his rope to the piton stuck in the underside of the bridge. Then, as gently as a mother caressing a babe's brow, the tall warrior eased his way down. Wick went next, with Gryph bringing up the rear. About a dozen yards down, a rough horizontal line bisected the entire shaft. Gryph realized that it was a vein of silver. It shone a dull purple in the light of Ovrim's spell, and whatever horror clung to the walls seemed incapable of passing the silver barrier. Gryph pushed back a feeling of panic as he lowered himself past this barrier and into the maw of the pulsating shaft. A sickening sensation dug into his gut. Ahead of him, both Ovrim and Wick had stopped. About 2 yards below Ovrim's dangling feet, another stone causeway bisected the shaft, but this time, instead of naked stone, this bridge swarmed with roiling motion. Gryph found his eyes drawn to the inky movement. Gryph had no real-world equivalent for what he was seeing, unless crude oil somehow learned to pulse with some wretched mockery of life. Ovrim eased his satchel open and removed a flask of silver-laden liquid. He thumbed the top open and poured the contents in an even swath along the bridge. When the silver solution touched the ooze, it reacted as flesh to fire and retracted as it burned. Tendrils rushed away from the burning liquid, and the smell that reached Gryph's nose forced him to hold back a retch. Gryph analyzed the retreating blob. Behemoth Black Ooze, Level 66, H 2200, S 4044, M 0, SP 0. Black oozes are sentient aberrations born from the misuse of soul magic. They start off small, but over time they can grow to be incredibly large and deadly. They are intelligent, but incredibly alien, and have no sympathy for any other beings in the realms. Strengths unknown, immunities unknown, weakness unknown. Gryph's mind reeled in horror. This thing was one massive organism, and it completely surrounded them. Its total health dwarfed even the arbaleth. Below him, Gryph could hear Wick's breathing become erratic as panic invaded the gnome's mind. Ovrim's eyes snapped up at Wick, which only caused the gnome to breathe heavier. The ooze seemed to sense the noise and stretched out tendrils from the surrounding walls. First one, then another, then dozens, then hundreds. Above and below them, tentacles searched. Wick was about to lose it. Gryph quickly cast Mind Shield on Wick, hoping that it would ease his fear. After a moment, Wick got his breathing under control, but the tendrils of ooze continued to search, and they were getting closer. Ovrim reached into his bag again, but this time he threw the vial against the wall a dozen feet below the bridge. It exploded and cast a silvery wave of liquid in all directions. The ooze spasmed in pain again and pulled back from the spot of the attack. Better yet, nearly all the tentacles grasping towards the party retracted and re-emerged around the point of the attack. Ovrim dropped silently to the cleared bridge and motioned for the others to do the same. Soon all three crouched on the bridge. Ovrim pointed down, and the ball of violet light barely illuminated another bridge about 30 feet below. Ovrim tied another length of rope around the bridge and motioned for Gryph to take point to the next leg. Gryph eased himself over and climbed down. A few feet above the next landing, Gryph paused and tossed his own silver grenade onto the pulsating mass of ooze. Once again, the ooze instantly retreated, allowing Gryph to land softly. He looked up to see Wick easing himself over the edge and down the rope. Wick was barely halfway down when Gryph saw that the ooze was advancing once more. Ovrim was running out of space. He shot a quick glance down at Gryph, who nodded in understanding. "Hurry," the look said. Gryph tossed a frantic look at Wick and motioned for him to hurry. The gnome nodded and increased his pace, seeming to control his fear. Above him, Ovrim eased himself over the edge and moved down the rope by alternating tight and loose grips. Wick dropped into Gryph's waiting arms, jumped down, and pulled two of the silver grenades from his pack, eyes trained in all directions. The tendrils came close a few times, but Wick ducked under them, keeping his cool. Gryph looked back up to see Ovrim about halfway down. Despite the speed of his descent, Gryph could see that the ooze had reached the rope and was eating through it. "He will not make it," Gryph realized. He pulled his rope from his side and cast Animate Rope. The length of spider silk twined itself around his waist and then around the bridge he was standing on. Ovrim slid down the rope again, but this time, when he gripped the rope to slow his descent, the force on the acid-damaged rope proved too much, and it snapped. To his credit, Ovrim did not scream as he fell. Gryph moved to catch him, but Ovrim hit the bridge mere inches from his grasp. Ovrim's head smashed against the stone with a wet thud. For a moment, it seemed as if he'd be able to hold on to the stone trellis, but the impact caused him to lose consciousness. His grip went slack, and he fell over the edge. Without hesitation, Gryph leapt off the ledge. He dove at the tumbling man, arm outstretched. Just as Ovrim was about to pass the limit of the rope's length, Gryph grasped him by the ankle. Gryph held on with all his might, and was happy he'd tossed a few points into strength the last time he leveled. He felt his shoulder nearly dislocate and Ovrim's ankle snap as the rope arrested their downward spiral. Overham's eyes snapped open as the pain woke him. He nearly gasped, but refrained. They swung in a loose parabola back and forth, coming closer and closer to the spasming sides of the shaft with each motion, before their spin calmed and eased. A small grunt of pain pushed through Overham's lips, and the tendrils reached out and towards him. One entwined itself around Overham's waist, and Gryph could hear the dull sizzle as the acid ate through the warrior monk's armor. Then another reached towards Overham's face. It slid across the man's exposed skin and ate at his flesh. Tears streamed down the Zydai's face, and blood oozed from the corners of his mouth where he had bit his tongue to hold back from screaming. But soon the pain was too much, and Overham howled. The ooze reacted with hunger, and tendrils whipped out from the walls. They twined around both men, and Gryph felt himself burn. He too screamed, his health plummeting. Debuff added. Acid damage, 20 points per second. Gryph was being eaten alive and knew he had mere seconds. Then there was a pop, and another, and plumes of silver-laden water covered him. The ooze instantly retreated, and the solution counteracted the acid attack, easing Gryph's pain. He looked up to see Wick tossing a few more of the silver concoctions, clearing most of the bridge. He then pulled his silver dagger and swiped at a tendril that came close. It cleaved through the gloppy ooze with a sizzle and a hiss. 3 more tentacles met the same fate before the assault stopped.
"We need to get back up to that bridge,"
Overham yelled through gritted teeth.
"There's a tunnel we can use to escape this hellhole."
Gryph nodded and commanded his rope to pull them to safety. Wick held guard as Gryph pushed Overham up onto the bridge. Both men downed a health potion. Overham pulled a few silver potions from his back and advanced on the ooze-covered wall. He held the potions high and stared in silence at the pulsating blob. His eyes closed, as if he were attempting to communicate with the beast. After a moment's pause, Overham fell to one knee. The tendrils withdrew their attack, and the ooze in front of Overham sluiced open, revealing a tunnel.
"We have come to an agreement."
"You can't be serious. You trust this giant blob of acid snot?"
Wick said as he eyed the now smooth surface of the ooze.
"Its mind is very alien, but it understands pain as well as any other living creature. I promised it far more pain if it did not let us pass in peace." "Will it keep its side of the bargain?"
Gryph asked, eyeing the long tunnel ahead.
"I believe it will, but hold your silver solutions in your hands and be ready to run."
Gryph reluctantly nodded and watched for a moment as Overham entered the tunnel. He had a flash of being stuck in the digestive tract of some massive beast and felt himself panic slightly. He breathed a few deep breaths before stepping in as well.
"I fucking hate this place,"
Gryph muttered. The party moved slowly through the tunnel as it turned and weaved. As they walked, the ooze parted like the Red Sea as they approached and flowed back in as they walked past.
"The walls are moving. The ceiling is moving. The floor is moving,"
Wick grumbled as he forced back another bout of claustrophobia.
"Absolutely nothing about this is okay."
"Quiet,"
Overham said in a calm but deadly tone. As they rounded another corner, It dawned on Gryph that, without Ovrim's parley, there was no way they'd have been able to force their way through this length of tunnel. Had this been part of the plan? Ovrim turned another corner, and Gryph heard the man say, "Almost there," in a calm voice. Gryph breathed heavily and tried not to run as he rounded the bend and light from the end of the tunnel came into view. Ovrim passed through unscathed. He smiled at Gryph and nodded, pointing his attention to the ground at the tunnel's exit. Gryph saw a perfect crescent of silver embedded in the floor. As he crossed over the barrier, he craned his neck. The thin silver band crested the entire entranceway like the line of a magic circle. As his foot hit solid ground on the other side, he realized he'd been holding his breath. The exhalation was as big a relief as any he'd ever experienced. Ovrim motioned Gryph to stand behind him. "Keep those solutions ready." As Wick turned the last corner, a huge grin crossed his face, and he ran. The sudden motion caused the ooze to flutter and pulse. "Slow," Ovrim warned, but Wick would have none of it. Panic had taken him. Wick was near the end when his toe caught a ridge on the floor and he went down. The vial in his left hand skittered across the floor before bouncing up and onto the wall, where it burst. The ooze at the point of contact sizzled and disappeared, burned away under the power of the silver. Wick struggled to get to his feet as the rest of the ooze pulsed in what may have been anger. Gryph could hear a deep rumble, akin to the sound of water gurgling deep inside a network of pipes, but this was 100 times louder. Ovrim didn't hesitate and lobbed several of the silver grenades into the tunnel. This opened a path for Wick, who scrambled to his feet and ran again. This time, tendrils erupted from the sides and the roof of the tunnel, tripping Wick. Terror crossed the gnome's face as he jerked to a stop, and the noise from further down the tunnel grew to a cacophony. More tendrils lashed out, enveloping Wick. He screamed as the acid dissolved his skin. Gryph drew his ice dagger and rushed back into the tunnel, hacking and slashing at tendrils that came his way. The daggers did not slice through the thick liquid the way the silver did, but the freeze damage seemed to stop them in their tracks for a few moments. Unfortunately, he still felt the burning pain of dozens of tendrils latching onto his limbs and biting into his face. The cloying black ooze could just muster up more tentacles than he could cut. The world turned to black as the ooze sealed off the entrance, entombing them. Gryph heard Wick's low moans ahead and knew his friend was near death. If only he could get to him. Another tendril gripped him around the arm, and another around the neck. Deep, burning pain dug into Gryph. Death was coming for him.